welcome to Solved, because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. Previously on Solved.
Many on the right, just have this craving for 1950s America.
Men stopped working in offices because women had started working in offices too, and our culture hates women. That is such a succinct and so much better of an explanation of the changing dynamics.
Public things are good until black people start using them. And now we got to get rid of all the public services. Office jobs are good until women are doing them. And now they're terrible, and they're weak, and they're terrible, and they're making you feminized and terrible.
Today, we are going to explain to young men what to do to make women want to have sex with them.
Oh my God.
Is that not accurate?
Is that what we're going to talk about today? I didn't.
Is that
know
not
that.
accurate?
I guess.
Yeah.
It could be a conclusion. Yeah.
And now, the thrilling conclusion of Solved.
As a kid, none of this was good. Being superficial, being self-centered, being narcissistic, hating women. None of this is good. And I cannot put myself in the place in trying to be as empathetic as possible where you can watch that and come away with, this is a good avatar for my life. I get working out, take care of yourself. Yeah, but Patrick Bateman as the model?
I think I know what it is. And I think Amanda's story about the burn book is the explanation. Because
they
they
summarize
think,
that.
we will. But the idea is, I can do all the good things and I just won't have the bad consequences be part of it. So Amanda, tell us about your burn book.
Oh God. So we talked about this a long time ago because we were talking about how Silicon Valley tech bros get the wrong lessons from science fiction. Actually, this might have come up just on the past episode, but the personal story is that when I was very young, I watched a TV show that, a kid show where they made a burn book, just like in Mean Girls, and the consequences were terrible. But I was like, yeah, but if I do it, because I'm 7 or 8, if I do it, the consequences won't be terrible. And we'll make it not a burn book, but a nice book. And I brought that idea to my after school program, and it very quickly turned into a burn book because of course it did. And the consequences were terrible. And so that mindset is a child's optimism and is very prevalent in a lot of areas of our society. So that is what the burn book story is.
That's cute though. American Psycho is the name of the movie. But also, I guess we talked about this. I think we talked about this in the last episode. But Breaking Bad, Walter White. It's called Breaking Bad. He's the bad guy. He's the villain of the series. He's not the hero. He's the main character, but he's the villain. And people are rooting for him. And that one is, I guess, more understandable because you learn about him as a person and all this deep things about. Patrick Bateman is nothing. There's nothing to him. That's the whole point of the thing. He is not fully human. He's not engaged with humanity. And to see that and think, that's me. I got to do that. And I'll get all the ladies.
Yeah,
Elon Musk. We're living this now. Elon Musk is so disconnected. He doesn't care about anyone. And yet he's idolized in some corners of the internet.
I think, Deon, your problem is that your self-esteem isn't low enough to be able to truly empathize with people who might look up to Patrick Bateman, because they might already think of themselves as I'm basically subhuman. No one wants to have sex with me. No one's interested in me. I'm ugly. I'm a loser. And so let me, Patrick Bateman looks good and cool and is rich. So I'll take the good, I'll leave the bad, maybe. And that'll get me to a place where people will find me attractive. I think they're grasping at straws. They're clearly grasping. And as Amanda pointed out, there is a huge deficit in the lessons that young men are being taught. And so they're grasping whatever they can get their hands on. And so, of course, actual misogynists with ill intent are presenting people like Patrick Bateman as the solution.
But it is deeper than that. It's not just grasping. I think this is what Deon's getting at. There is a definite cultural shift right now. And we kind of alluded to it a while back, talking about the anti-hero trend and what that has done to us for the last 20, 30 years, since like The Sopranos, right? So I was reading an article the other day. I'm not going to call him out. I don't even remember the name of the podcast, but there's this guy who thinks of himself as a historian. He is not. He has a hugely successful podcast. He is a psychotic right-wing white supremacist, in my view. And his whole thing is making the villains of history, the ones we all agreed they did terrible shit, they're bad people, and being like, but what if they're not?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just like, what if they're not? Like, let's just take that view, and trying to reshape our entire collective agreement that the horrors that were committed by these people were bad and we should always see them as bad. And that is a dangerous seed that is being planted. And it is very effective, unfortunately. And there is a shift in people thinking people like Patrick Bateman are good, even if they murder people. Like, that is an actual thing that is happening in our society. And we shouldn't underestimate it, because it is having horrific consequences. It is grasping to some degree, but it's also, there's so much out there to confirm and uphold that viewpoint. There's not enough to shut it down. And since everybody's into fringe views right now because they like to see it as cool and kind of edgy to have this totally different view than the mainstream culture, that's a big problem.
Well, it's almost like nuance is important, but it needs to be accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you don't put an accurate nuance on something, like I would say, even people with mental health disorders, even murders and things like that, there's nuance you can add. There's empathy to be had, right? But it's important that that's accurate, just not because I feel like they might identify something, but where it leads is problematic. Like, you're pulling in information that isn't accurate, isn't actually how the world is.
I do have another Bell Hooks quote that really fits perfectly with all of this, because it talks about violence and like the inherent like message of violence in patriarchy. So she says, this is a patriarchal truism that most people in our society want to deny. Whenever women thinkers, especially advocates of feminism, speak about the widespread problem of male violence, folks are eager to stand up and make the point that most men are not violent. Hashtag not all men, right? They refuse to acknowledge that masses of boys and men have been programmed from birth on to believe that at some point they must be violent, whether psychologically or physically, to prove that they are men. So you got Patrick Bateman, and you have an entire cultural ecosystem that says you got to be violent. You got to prove yourself to be aggressive and tough and the alpha or the top dog. So those go together very, very well in a scary way.
Mm-hmm. I guess we're fighting against deep, deep cultural currents. Mm-hmm. This country is founded on violence. The idea that Europeans came over here and found an empty country. It's not empty. Brought over a workforce that I guarantee the Trump of the time said, yeah, these black people just want to pick cotton. Try to get them to do something else. They just want to pick it. That's what they want to do. Like, you could put them in a penthouse, or you could put them in the plantation house, and they would just not like it. We got to leave them to do that. Dehumanizing people, dominating other people has been seen as a virtue in this country and celebrated as such for a long time. The great men of history usually are the most violent men of history. And that's, I guess, just the natural next step is to take a movie that I think Erin said, nuance is important. I don't feel like that one's very nuanced. It's been a long time since I've seen American Psycho, and maybe I could be wrong, but it didn't seem very nuanced. It seemed pretty on the nose. And if they are missing that, then there are so many other things that they're missing before they saw that, or maybe didn't even see it, because that's a big thing with the younger generation, is that they haven't actually seen the films or read the books that they're meaning.
Total context collapse.
Yeah, so there's no context for it, so they don't even have the context, so there's no nuance to be had because there's no context. So maybe what they're liking is that Christian Bale is a handsome, ripped man who takes care of himself. And if that's the case, okay. But I feel like there's probably a lot more to it than that.
So as I was reading all these articles, I sort of put that John Adams quote that I read before and Deon, the quote that you brought in, the hard men make good times quote, put those in a blender and came up with more questions than answers. So the John Adams quote, remember, I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. And now, so like incels feel like they want to go back to a period of greater masculinity with masculine jobs, but they don't understand shit about history and politics, right? And so, like, some argue that society has become too decadent and disconnected from hard work, but like, we might take that idea and flip it and say that society has become disconnected from hard truths, this like fundamental ideas that you needed to study politics and war so that you don't go down the wrong path. Anyway, so getting distance from hard times creates nostalgia for those times without an understanding of what's being wished for. Like, this is how vaccine free natural living has become romanticized, because we've gone long enough that people don't remember what it was like. We've gone long enough without people, the majority of people don't have to do like backbreaking labor, and we've gone long enough that then people can fantasize that would be better. Doing backbreaking labor would be better than a bullshit job in an office, right? And so the question about John Adams' desire for his grandchildren, or the nature of societies, as we discussed, to progress from like agrarian to manufacturing to service. And then another parallel I thought about is like, the children of rich people are always fuck ups. Like, they never can like carry on and be competent because their lives were so cushy that they end up being like messes of people. Like, they're either on drugs and overdosing, or just like so in a bubble they have no idea how anything really works in society. And so then the question is like, is there some legitimacy to this question, but like not in the way the incels would frame it, but is like, has this intergenerational disconnect helped create people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about? Because, metaphorically speaking, incels are the ones who have grown up in such an advanced and privileged society that they're kind of the ones making porcelain. If you spend your life focusing on tapestry and porcelain, you might not have any idea of the foundations on which you are standing and what it took to get you to that point. So you're there and you're like, oh, like, porcelain seems like it's for girls. Like, I wish I could go to war for some reason, because you've completely forgotten that society put in all the work to make it so you didn't have to do that. Am I onto something?
I was thinking about, while you were talking, Pete Hegseth. We didn't bring him up at all, but he's like the poster child for all of this.
Yeah.
And, whenever you hear this, he may still be Secretary of Defense. He may have been in an alley
Let's hope
drunk
not.
somewhere because he retired or got fired. But he constantly is talking about, in his defenses of leaking all this information. And I'm going to say this, it's derogatory, but he's a messy bitch. He says all this. He's the least manly, stoic guy there is. He talked for a living, but he's constantly talking about, I'm doing this for the war fighters. I'm doing this for the war fighters.
Ugh.
Because he doesn't want to be perceived as soft and weak. Meanwhile, the last guy, Lloyd Austin, I don't know what he sounds like. Didn't hear a word from him. I'm sure all the books that Pete Hegseth has banned, Lloyd Austin has probably read every single one of them, because it is important to, if you're going to be, like John Adams said, planning war or whatever, you've got to have some context. And I think the value of what Jay's saying is like, these people, the idea is that eventually you don't have to study war, you could study this. But that's where a liberal arts education comes in, is that you do have some baseline knowledge of a lot of different things. And you can go in a direction that maybe you couldn't have gone 2 centuries ago because it wasn't an option. The world wasn't safe enough, but now it is safe enough. But you do have some context. And meanwhile, these folks, the Pete Hegsis of the world, want to get rid of any context in history so that you can't even know that there was a better time, a worse time, good things, bad things in the past.
Yeah.
Yep.
Now is the only thing that matters. And now is for hard men, strong men. And that's it. And that's all there ever will be. There will never be an opportunity for anyone's life to get better because there will be no context to know that life could be better.
I mean, and unfortunately, speaking of war, like just looking at the tariffs, the interactions with other countries, the moves that they're making,
Mhm.
like how does this end? I can't help the feeling that's arising that this eventually leads to war. I'm not saying there's not plenty of off ramps that we can take, but like, unfortunately, the men dreaming of this might actually have to experience it and have to live through it because we're creating the uncertainties, we're creating the times that we lived through before that made us more unsafe. And I mean, let's be honest, we're an imperialist
Yeah.
nation, so like safety relative. I do need to add that little bit just because I'm not on the side of us going to war, quote, for our safety, because generally that's not how it works.
I mean, the neoliberal world order, like everybody on the left has always criticized it, and rightfully so. There's so much wrong with it. It's better than America being shut off from everyone and spending $1 trillion on the military
Yeah.
with no prospects and a bunch of angry people and sad, destitute people.
Are these our
That's-
choices, Deon? Damn.
Those
Well,
are those are the choices being created.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
the
I mean,
thing,
that's-
right? Like
It's the future.
the problems perceived on the right often starts with a seed of truth, and then they go completely off the rails in the wrong direction. Okay, moving on to more discussions about men and women trying to negotiate the space between them so they can have sex, ultimately, I think is what it comes down to. So there's a story recently where Matt Walsh and Megyn Kelly, two terrible people who are terrible to different degrees, had a disagreement about traditional ideas of masculinity and femininity in dating. So Megyn Kelly expressed the idea that there can be a new sort of like hybrid concept of gender relations in which men might still pay for a date, but women don't have to then become indentured sex slaves and broodmares, while Matt Walsh thinks that paying for a date is sort of fulfilling one end of a contract, the other end of which women should then feel compelled to uphold, which is basically the sex slave and broodmare scenario. Before we go about breaking this down, I think Deon, you wanted to come down unnervingly on the side of, well, why don't you just tell people what
Well,
you thought about it?
I wholeheartedly support Matt Walsh. I wanted to announce that today that
Whoa.
I'm breaking off Best of the Right podcast
Shit.
hosted by no, like he made one little point that I did kind of agree with, but I do want to point out real quick that I don't actually listen or read these articles. I don't want to look at a screen. It feminizes you. So I listen to these articles and the robot voice kept saying, Megyn Kelly. It was-
Yeah.
I found
yeah.
funny. And maybe because I was laughing at that, I missed the point that Matt Walsh was making and it was actually evil. But the point that it shouldn't be on a man in a society to, actually, that's not, he didn't mean this, but it shouldn't be on a man to pay for every dinner in a dating scenario where everybody in theory is on equal footing. I kind of agree with that. And then I'm going to get slapped down immediately.
So I actually like surface level. I agree with that, right? Because Matt Walsh is really good apparently at making things sound just like so normal. And isn't this a reasonable point, right? So on the surface, should men pay for every date and like women should pay for nothing? Like, of course not. And like, I don't think anyone really thinks that. I mean, maybe there are some, but what he does not mention, and neither does Megyn Kelly, because both of them aren't thinking as deeply as we are about this, is how often men use paying for stuff as a form of manipulation against women. So, you know, depending on the scenario, in my 20s, when I was dating and going out to bars and all that, I would often reject drink offers at a bar, even if maybe I was interested, because for two reasons. Like, one, I don't want a stranger holding my drink at any point. And two, I see it as a kind of mini contract that puts you in an awkward, like, social dynamic where you feel obligated to talk to someone simply because they bought you something. And men know this. And they know, and the reason I know they know this is because when you say no thank you, or you don't talk to them for a long time after they bought you a drink that you didn't ask for, they get mad often or irritated or call you a bitch or like get verbally abusive in some way. And look, women know men. women have to deal with men and their fucking feelings so often. They know them. They know what their inner world is. They're not pulling the wool over your eyes. Like, they know what's going on there. And when you go out on a date with a guy and you have a dinner and they insist on paying, how many of those men are going to assume that because they paid, that means you're going to go home with them? A fair amount are going to assume that and think that that is the deal you made. And it actually, what it makes me think of is that Deon will get this. He's a big Always Sunny fan. There's a scene from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, super creepy, where they're talking about bringing girls on a boat. And
The implication.
and he keeps saying, because of the implication. And it's such a good scene because it exposes the way a lot of men think about how they can manipulate women. Well, they're going to have to sleep with us because of the implication. Of course, in his case, he's talking about I'm going to murder them. And here, I mean, could be murder, it could be verbal abuse, it could be, you know, any sort of tarnishing their reputation. I mean, like, there's a lot that men can do when they're annoyed and mad at women for making them feel rejected. And so should men pay for dinners all the time? Like, no. And I don't think anyone really thinks that. Also, men totally use it as a tool of manipulation often. And women constantly have to be on guard and ready for whatever comes their way if they say, no, thank you, or I'm not interested. And look, like, if you're a woman in this world, you just know that that is true. It's not something that needs to be up for debate. And so I went Dutch most of the time, as often as I possibly could, to avoid those scenarios. I'd like insist on it because, like, you don't want to put yourself in that situation and you don't know who you're dealing with. You just met these people, right? So you just have to do so much instant assessing as a woman, and it's fucking exhausted, but it's essential to your survival. So there it is. How do you feel now, Deon?
Well, so I think Deon forgot to say that he agrees with that separate from any context.
Which is why
exists.
Matt Walsh sees
Yeah.
things separate from any context
Definitely.
that exists. Yeah.
Yeah, because what I would bring is 1974. 1974 is the year women were able to get their own bank account. That means I am the first generation in my family that wasn't alive when that became the law. So we are not so far removed from the fact that women were subjugated, dependent on men, and we are now in a transition where, yes, I do think that we're going to get to a place where there's no expectations, but gender roles have been reinforced. Now, like, if this makes you feel better, Deon, gender is a construct. Masculinity is a tool that is used to box people in so that the imperialist project, which is the United States or any other country, can move forward. Like, there has to be some construct in order to control people. And that is what masculinity is. And unfortunately, these men are just falling right into it. And as much as I love Amanda saying we, like, I am going to let you know that I am a partner, but like, women already make up the bulk of service industries. we're already the social workers, we're already the teachers, we're already the therapists. Like, we're already doing a lot of work to try to, help with culture, to get us on the right path. It's going to take men, because men, like that community that we're talking about, would listen to this, and the two people they would critique the most are the
Oh
socialized
yeah.
women on here. And
Even
like,
as
they're not
cartoons.
going to listen to us. Like, that's why you're seeing, yeah, even as cartoons, still going to tear us apart. And like, the thing with the UK and them having a problem with teachers and the disrespect that's happening. Like, yeah, it's going to take men talking about this and being more open, because I don't think this represents the mass amount of men out there, but I do think that men silence their own views when they're around their friends. And I don't think they push back in the same way that they need to. And like, that's how this ideology, like, there are people who think everyone else thinks the same way they do. It's just kind of like race. Like, there are so many, like, Venn diagram of racial issues and patriarchy. And one of the things I would think is, like, a lot of people think all white people think like me. Same thing with men. Like, men assume that other men think like they do, and they need to hear
Yeah,
that they
you're right.
don't.
I should have nuanced we. I mean, I do think women have to be involved because we have to, but most of the change that's going to happen is going to come from men interacting with men. Yeah, totally.
So Amanda gave us the hyper personal perspective. Erin broadened it out a little bit more, which sets me up perfectly because I was going to take it to the even bigger perspective, which is that things like the societal crumbs of things like holding open doors or saving women and children first from sinking boats or paying for first dates were, so first of all, based on the assumed fragility of women. So that all helps reinforce that dynamic. Also, I was going to bring up, as Erin already did, the financial realities from really, really not that long ago. Like, the dynamic is that men paid because women didn't have any money to their names. And so, of course, that became the natural way of things. And what we're dealing with now is like a cultural hangover from that. The cultural norms of men paying have stuck around longer than it needs to have, but like, clearly we are already adjusting to that. Amanda talking about going Dutch as often as she could, and that like the general consensus these days is like, no, we're not expecting for men to pay. But like, there will be some outliers on that. Some women will have that expectation, but all of that comes from this cultural hangover from decades ago. So understanding where that comes from is important. But all of these things, they're all arguments for why it's acceptable to continue to subjugate women in other much more substantial ways, right? Like, well, I hold open doors for women. That's why they should live in the home and take care of my children
Yeah.
and make me sandwiches all the time. I held the door for them, right? Like, that's this perverse non-balance that gets trotted out as arguments for why gender dynamics should continue to be what they have been. And it's absurd. Like, it's a trick. It's a tool to help continue those like deeply, deeply unequal systems by pretending like there's some sort of inequality and like division of labor and, well, like, I'll pay for the date and you'll have sex with me. Like, it's all the same bullshit. To wit, Matt Walsh elaborates later, I think maybe he and Megyn Kelly were like tweeting at each other or something. So he continues and he goes on his show and says, I think women's first priority should be the children and the home, but that doesn't mean she can't do other things and pursue other vocations alongside that. And continuing, he says, this conversation is about the ideals and about attraction. What is the ideal that men strive for? What qualities do they find attractive in a woman? So most men ideally, he's still talking. So most men ideally would like to earn an income that would allow them to be the sole breadwinner in the home. Most men like the idea of being the provider. That idea will not always become reality, but it is the ideal. And as for attraction, men are not generally attracted to a woman's professional ambitions, end quote. So like, all of this I just want to bring in another example because all this reminded me of another thing I read a little while ago. This guy tweeted his Twitter handle, just to give you a sense of him. His Twitter handle is John Ocasio-Cortez Nolte, and his description is, "My pronouns are Trump and one." Deon and Erin, do you know who this guy is? Do you know why I found him?
I don't know how you found him. I read the quote, but
Well, yeah, sure. So this is the same guy who wrote my favorite article about conservatives and COVID, arguing that liberals were actively trying to prevent conservatives from getting vaccinated so that they would die. And their strategy to do this was to strongly and urgently encourage everyone to get vaccinated.
Reverse psychology to murder.
But they did it in a really pushy and obnoxious way, thereby using reverse psychology to get conservatives to refuse the potentially life-saving vaccine. So that's this guy. And that guy tweeted, quote, "Dear ladies, tattoos on women are ugly. The more tattoos, the uglier. Truly beautiful women become ugly via tattoos. Someone had to say it. Signed, Normal Guys."
Yeah, he's very normal. He's so
It is
fucking
so
normal.
to speak for all men.
Right.
So normal.
And which is exactly the crux of it, because he and Matt Walsh are doing the same thing. They're treating their own personal preferences as the standard. And Walsh, like, you know, he describes, he doesn't know any men who would be attracted to women for their ambition, but he also probably doesn't talk to too many people who don't think very similarly to the way he does. And so he has no outside frame. And so he extrapolates his personal preferences as normal. Plus, Matt Walsh goes even further and frames it as like a biological reality rather than being socially constructed. Not that he might have any idea what the concept of being socially constructed is. Matt says, "As a man, I have never heard another man say anything approaching that about a woman that he's dating or married to. I've never heard that because men and women are different. They are looking for different things." He's just like, it's biological. I can't possibly be wrong because science.
It's the word vocation. I don't know why, but in my mind, I just went back to like the drawing room of Jane Austen, where the women are just sitting around. Maybe one plays the piano forte, the other is doing some needlework. Like, don't worry, we can still have hobbies in this world where we're stuck inside the house. Like we can explore our interests. Maybe we get to that dreamland where we have time for art. I mean,
he specifically,
I don't want to say I'm converted.
Yeah. He specifically says, like, he gives the example of his wife and he's like, well, she volunteers and does stuff she's interested in. That brings her joy and value. I'm like,
from home.
Okay. So from home, and she doesn't get paid. So, okay. That's allowed. And she can also take care of the children and, you know, clean the house and all that shit. But, you know, if she wants, you know, she can go do something for no pay. Yeah, that's okay with me. But like, here's what I'm just like seething as Jay was reading it again, because he's such a fucking idiot. But like, I have no empathy.
You mean Matt Walsh, right?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, Matt Walsh. Jesus, did that come out wrong? Yeah, I have empathy for a lot of people. I don't have empathy for Matt Walsh. Let's just say this preference that he claims everybody has, you know, for men really wanting non-working women. Like, let's just say that catches on in a big, big way, because it's not true now, but whatever. What is the ultimate conclusion of that? Why don't we just like walk through the steps of that? So men like Matt Walsh think women will just cave and become trad wives because they want a partner so badly that like they're just gonna give up the things that they want in life, right? Like that's their assumption.
Desperate.
Right. Desperation. Yeah. That's not how people work. And that's not what healthy people do. There might be some, but it's not what healthy people do. But if you think women are one-dimensional and that they must desperately deep down want traditional gender roles, which is what Matt Walsh thinks everyone does, then you'll assume you can coerce them, right? They're obviously easily manipulatable. So yeah, you're going to think you can just direct the trajectory of their lives. But what we're seeing right now is women are saying, I'd rather be alone than deal with some moron that I have to clean up after and, take care of like a child. And there are sperm banks. There are gay men who might give sperm. Like if a woman really wanted a child, there are ways to do that, right? So who's going to have to conform to who? The guys who want families are going to have to deal with the fact that their wife works or go without in this current moment. Or, because we are going to the final conclusion of all of this, men will try to use their power, because they are fucking in power, to force women to do what they want through oppression and restrictive laws, which is already starting to happen. That's the ultimate conclusion. You cannot have it a different way. If that's what you believe, that is the ultimate conclusion. There's nothing else to say about that. And also, just real quick, I hate to break it to you, Matt, but like, I have guy friends who've described the women they're dating in exactly the way that you say they never do. She's awesome. She's super smart. She's a lawyer. She's really ambitious. She makes a shit ton of money. Like, absolutely, I have heard that. Oh my God. Like, that's insane. The bubble he lives in is so deeply entrenched and weird. Smart men want smart women who also have professional goals and are doing well. So if you're an evolved smart man, you're going to want an evolved smart woman who has goals. You don't speak for men, Matt Walsh. The ones you do speak for are fucking broken.
The society that they are, like people like Matt Walsh and the whole system that the Project 2025 Trump folks are trying to create, are creating a scenario where one income will not suffice, cannot suffice. It already doesn't. And that's part of the reason why we're here. They're not doing anything to make it so a man could work a job and take care of a family. That's not the goal at all. This is really just a power fantasy where there's a class of men who do have trophies as wives or stable women or whatever they consider their.
I think you meant wives as trophies.
Yeah,
because trophies as wives creates a whole different image.
Wives. Yeah, whatever. Like
whatever they. Helena, a really good independent film that everyone should watch.
Whatever you want to say, they don't think of their wives as fully
animate objects.
Yeah, fully human people. Like they are, broodmares, whatever. They're there to serve a purpose. Everything is for the purpose of elevating the one guy, because it's all about them. That's all this has ever been about. And that it's never really been that way for most people in America in the first place. There's always been poor people. There's always been black and brown people who haven't been able to do this. Black women have worked ever since there were black women in America. That has always been a thing that's happened here. This is not about men and women. This is about a certain class of white, straight man. That's who he's speaking to. That's who he thinks he's talking to. He doesn't really care what anybody here thinks, except for maybe you, Jay. Jay, Matt Walsh, like think about it. Join the cult. Or become one of the poors. That's the option on a personal level. And this is why it's difficult for me to empathize, because my background doesn't align with this, culturally, ethnically, but like my grandma, my mother's mom, got divorced in the early 70s. Ever since I was alive, she was a single lady who had a job, who owned a home, who was the hub for the whole family. When things went wrong, we went to grandma. Grandma took care of everything. That's my world. That's my life. That's my upbringing. Like kind of a matriarchy. She was the place where we met. We went to grandma's house, who was single the whole time. There was no man. She didn't need a man. That's my reality. Seemed normal to me. Not that big a deal. Women have money. Like that's some women have money. It's always been normal. And I think she was a pretty happy woman. I remember specifically when found out she was sick. She died of cancer decades ago at this point. But the last thing I ever said to her was, "I love you." She said that to me. We had a strong relationship. I had a strong relationship with a woman who was a woman, a human being, a teacher, a mother, all these things. She was a person with interests and values. She wasn't just someone who had kids and took care of kids. That's never what she was to me. And that's where I have trouble with all of this is, what does Matt Walsh think about his mom? What does Matt Walsh think about his sister? What does he think about his grandmother? Does he
Yeah, he says
really
he's from
hate
a family of women.
Yeah, does
4
he?
sisters and
Do they know that he secretly hates them? Because that's what this is. He doesn't like women. Like, and I don't know how he reconciles that, because I think in his life he probably does think he loves those people, but he can't love those people and think that they only can fit into this little box, because that's not love.
Well, he might just think that they're not fully human. You know, it's like a pet. You can fully love a pet and
God.
not consider it to be on an equal level with you, a human being. So
I don't know if Joe's
just like,
joking
look,
or not, but I think I agree.
does it matter? Does it matter?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean,
I resent the framing. Continue.
yeah. I mean, the answer is
Yeah.
50-50 as to whether or not I'm joking. Because really, like, I bet he thinks I fully love them,
Mhm.
and I think that they have a specific, appropriate place in society where they belong. And the implication of that is that they're not full human beings with full autonomy.
Mhm.
But it doesn't mean he doesn't love them. He just doesn't think that they have the same level of full autonomy as he does. Which brings us to people who have this experience directly and think, that's kind of fucked up. So from the New York Times, Michelle Goldberg wrote the article, "The Vibe Shifts Against the Right." And it's just a quick little profile piece of a woman who went the trad wife route temporarily and then pulled out. And just a couple of quotes from this woman. They say, "The vibe is shifting yet again. The cumulative IQ of the right is looking worse than the market. The mother of young children, this woman described internalizing trad wife ideas about women's primacy in the home. When she tried to take on all the domestic labor in her own family, it nearly broke her. She started to realize that while the new right's racism and misogyny were often delivered with an ironic smirk, it was no joke. She said, as a woman, you'd have to lean back and just accept that people will belittle you." And then it says that when she looks back on the milieu she was once a part of, she says she sees no solid ideas for a post-liberal society. It was all just aesthetics, resentments, and vibes. And she said, and now the vibes have knocked into reality. And it is just so jarring to see that none of the vibes stand up to scrutiny. None of the vibes actually fit onto the 21st century. None of the vibes, if implemented, would lead to anything but immiseration and war, end quote. Which, I mean, just coming back to what we've been repeating is that you can start with a seed of truth, but if you go on in a wildly wrong direction trying to solve that problem, you're going to end up with solutions that do not work. And she went through this experience, went down that path, was confronted with the reality and was like, oh, you guys are idiots. You're wrong about everything. You're all morons. This is terrible. And I'm out. And that's what you should expect to happen more often than not, because, I mean, because we are in the 21st century. Women can't be cloistered in the home. And I mean, like, remember when it was a political revolution to say that the personal was political? The meaning of that was to recognize that these individual women leading shitty lives sort of under the thumb of their husbands were not alone, because it turned out every woman was living that same life at that time. But that was like a revelation for them to figure out that was happening to other people. Now, I mean, with the internet, like, on one hand, it's easier to get stuck in your own bubble, but it's perfectly easy to break out of it as well and realize that there are other ways of doing things. So, like, women are just not going to stay under lock and key in the same way that they were before.
I am so ready for them to aim in the right direction. Because, like,
Wouldn't that be nice?
how many times are we going to cycle through demonizing women, demonizing people of color, immigrants, migrants, like
Mhm.
how many times? Because that's all this is. It's just
Yeah.
a recycling of things that we've worked to come out of. And like, I do think this demographic is the perfect audience for the Fight the Oligarchy tour that has been
Mhm.
going around. Like, I do think that they've identified the problem and then they unfortunately got online. Like, that is, that is how the content, the gateway, the bad, I don't even know, like, conclusions that they're coming to, I guess, but even in the middle, they're getting super messy with how things lead into each other, like, it's just not making sense, and, like, with the anti-intellectualism, like, I'm concerned that this subset of the population, we're not gonna get them back.
Mhm.
Like, their reasoning and how they think about the world is gonna be at a point that we're not able to wrangle them back in. So I hope, like, the young people, maybe Bernie, being the man that he is, can deliver the message that they really need to hear. Like, aim in the right direction.
Mhm.
Stop punching down.
I have one more final bell hooks quote to really bring it home for
Lay it on
for
us.
it. All right. Again, all of these are from The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love. You should definitely go check that out. So I was going back and forth between two. I might read both. Quote, learning to wear a mask, that word already embedded in the term masculinity, is the first lesson in patriarchal masculinity that a boy learns. He learns that his core feelings cannot be expressed if they do not conform to the acceptable behavior sexism defines as male. Asked to give up the true self in order to realize the patriarchal ideal, boys learn self betrayal early and are rewarded for those acts of soul murder. Soul murder. Soul murder. That's what's happening to men.
Yeah.
And this is where Bell Hooks she always makes me feel empathetic because like that's tragic. That's a tragedy. And all of these examples of hateful wannabe oppressor men trying to make that the dominant societal norm are just like empty shells because they've been brought up in a world and probably experienced things firsthand that have led to their soul murder. I mean, that's disturbing and dark and deeply, deeply sad and absolutely must be addressed. It's in all of our best interests for this to be addressed as soon as possible, in any way possible, because we are seeing what happens when those men rise to the top. They're in power right now. You can see how this goes. Final quote, very short. When culture is based on a dominator model, not only will it be violent, but it will frame all relationships as power struggles.
That first quote, I know I've referenced before Alok, who is
Mm-hmm.
a poet comedian. They have a way of talking about gender, and most of the, we'll say men, but people who lash out at them for their gender expression, they retort with, who hurt you?
Mm-hmm.
And they refer to it as a wound. And like talking about this masculinity, talking about incels who have this idea of what's going to cure them, like, right? What's going to bring something to them that they'll finally be able to fit into the tiny box that masculinity is. Because let's be honest, like true masculinity, the archetype of a man, most men don't fit in. Like it's an impossible standard. And women know this because we've been oppressed and those standards have been used to keep us in positions in life, to keep us subservient, that we've now had conversations with one another and recognized it. But like it is really hard to bring the oppressor into the mindset of you're also the oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I think it's going to take. Like they realize they're suffering, but then it becomes women that are the oppressors. Like they have to swap it in their mind instead of recognizing you are still the oppressor of women, but in doing that, you oppress yourself. You create systems that oppress yourself. So I'd really like to look at the solution as gender constructs in general being bullshit instead of just masculinity is in trouble, femininity is in trouble. Like, these constructs are bullshit, and we are all going to kill ourselves to fit into a tiny box. We're going to kill each other to make each other fit in those boxes.
Is everyone finally ready to reveal how young men can get laid?
Yeah, let's do it.
It's what we've been building towards this whole time. So this is not a brand new article. This is from 2017. And it's an article, I think, that is about a book. This writer, wrote a whole book about it. And this New York Times headline is "Why Women Had Better Sex Under Socialism." And it says, "Women under communism enjoyed more sexual pleasure. A comparative sociological study of East and West Germans conducted after reunification in 1990 found that Eastern women had twice as many orgasms as Western women." And it notes that Western women were enjoying all of the time-saving conveniences of capitalism, while socialist women actually had work to do, but their societies did more to support them with things like childcare. And it goes on, it says, as early as 1952, Czechoslovak sexologists started doing research on the female orgasm, and in 1961, they held a conference solely devoted to the topic. They focused on the importance of the equality between men and women as a core component of female pleasure. Some even argued that men need to share housework and child rearing, otherwise there would be no good sex. And then one last quote, it says, pre-1989 Polish sexologists didn't limit sex to bodily experiences and stressed the importance of social and cultural contexts for social pleasure. It was the state of socialism's answer to work-life balance. Even the best stimulation, they argued, will not help to achieve pleasure if a woman is stressed and overworked, worried about her future and financial stability. End quote. So, I mean, the answer, don't misunderstand, is not authoritarianism or communism, but like weirdly treating women like full human beings and making sure that no one is too overloaded with any level of work, particularly housework. And like, then people can have the time and space and mental energy to get horny.
I mean, it made me think of World War II. Like, the only time in that pre-feminism revolution history where women had to work because men were at war, and everyone was like, yay, women, members of society, filling the jobs that need to be filled. And there was this like very positive connotation. And then afterwards, let's go back to the way things were. And I mean, I don't know, it probably sounds strange, but like when I have learned about the Soviet Union and the way they talk about women as equal comrades in the society, I just wonder to myself, like, why? Why is that something that could happen under that kind of authoritarian rule and yet can't happen in a free society? Quote unquote free, because capitalism makes us all not free. But like, why? Why is that?
This one, it just seems like so painfully obvious that the misogynists, like, I don't even understand how they get their arguments to land with anyone, right? So there's the classic saying, build a man a fire and they'll be warm for a night. Set a man on fire and they'll be warm for the rest of their lives. So like, that's the classic. And I just think, like, force a woman to have sex and maybe you'll get to have sex. Make a woman want to have sex and you'll get to have sex for the rest of your life. Like, how is that complicated? How do you take the oppression mindset and think beyond today or right now? How do you think that's going to go over the rest of the course of your life? It's really baffling.
I mean, if you hate women, I guess you only want them to serve a very temporary use, so it becomes easier.
I know it just feels like so many of these people hate women because they're being rejected by them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So like figure out how to not be rejected. And the first one might be, treat them as humans, allow them to have ambitions,
And-
appreciate their
Whoa,
fullness.
Jay. You're putting the issue on men. Like you're trying to say there's a problem with them.
Yeah, there's too many unfuckable losers.
and that-
They need to stop being unfuckable losers.
Okay. It turns out we solved that one so thoroughly that we have run out of things to say because there is nothing else to say. I mean, if you have something to say, which I doubt, you can leave us a message, voicemail or text at 202-999-3991. Send us an email to j@bestoftheleft.com or reach us on Signal at bestoftheleft.01. Thanks for listening. And remember that this is all really happening. So continue to be decent, act like what you do and say matters, and do what matters most.
They told me, be the tough guy, never cry. Hide your feelings, don't even try. But deep inside, I felt so lost. Afraid to care, afraid of the cost. They never taught me how to share, to show my soul, to really care. Find the real way, don't pretend. Love's not a game you have to win. She's her own girl, let her be. Love her true and you'll be free. They said, stack the deck, make her rely. Build a world where she can't get by. But love's no deal, no power play. You can own her, she'll just walk away. I had to learn to let her shine, to cheer her dreams while chasing mine. Find the real way, don't pretend. Love's not a game you have to win. She's her own girl, let her be. Love her true and you'll be free. It's hard to change, I know it's true. The world's been rough on me and you. But it's not about roles or taking the lead. It's trusting her heart to know what she needs. Find the real way, don't pretend. Love's not a game you have to win. She's her own girl, let her be. Love her true and you'll be free. So here's the truth, it's plain to see. Love her for her autonomy. She's her own girl, let her be. Love her true and you'll be free. And so here's the truth, it's plain to see. Love her for her autonomy. She's her own girl, let her be. Love her true and you'll be free.